state governments have less power today, probably than the framers of the Constitution envisioned.
I don't often compare with what the framers of the Constitution envisioned because they were living in a different world and had completely different morals.
I'm assuming you're on the position of more federal oversight of the nation, better than decentralized power to the states.
Yeah. Basically, the crux of the argument, I mean, just look in the country's history, for egregious violations of people who are living in those states, only the federal government could tell states to fucking stop, basically.
So I agree that there needs to be a framework for the powers outlined in the Constitution for the federal government to have oversight over. These would include things like murder, other things like that, that it's implied or specifically said that people are entitled to life, liberty, etc. But when it comes to things not specific,
is that you conceding the prompt then?
No, it's not me conceding the prompt.
Okay.
It's that still, it's that federal oversight is implied through our Constitution in a limited amount of things: immigration, print and coin money, etc. Only a fool would say that that wouldn't be the case, that we should have all states.
Supreme law of the land is also in the Constitution.
Nonetheless, the point is the Constitution expressly says, right,
says
expressly,
land.
That's right. The question is, should it be the supreme law of the land in all cases? Or should we adhere to what the Constitution says in the 10th Amendment and says if it's not expressly outlined in the Constitution, it should be the purview of the states? I say the latter. I say that that's the way it should be.
That's not saying what you're saying, though. Like,
of course
if you're talking about a decentralized system, no, you're talking about the what you would call it before the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. That's a
That's
confederacy of states would be, right, or decentralized.
That's
federal
not
government
true.
is not in any way decentralized.
All of these things are thresholds, right? All of these things are that you could make the argument that we have completely zero federal power or completely zero state power. Are you implying that there should be completely zero state power?
No.
Much like I'm not saying that there should be completely zero federal power. I'm saying that the prompt to me suggests that we should err more on the side of local and state power than federal power. Yes, we'll both agree that there are areas, seeing as how neither of us are adapting the extreme on either end of this position. I think that my argument is that it should be more towards the state power on most rights holds true. Other than things that we should both concede that it would just make sense, like a military, that should be ran by the federal government. Printing and coining money, that should be ran by the federal government. Immigration, who's allowed in, that should be ran by the federal government. But most everything that's not expressly outlined in the Constitution should be up to the state government. And will you concede that we have run afoul of that? That state governments have less power today, probably than the framers of the Constitution envisioned?
I mean, I don't often compare with what the framers of the Constitution envisioned because they were living in a different world and had completely different morals.
Okay, then let's ask this. Would you say that the federal government has much more power than the state governments in areas other than those areas we're setting aside? Printing and coining money, murder's illegal, whatever, immigration, etc. Other than that, on almost all other issues, the federal government has much more authority than state governments.
And it used to, sure, yeah. And then state government, sure, yeah.
I think that's bad. I think that we should go to it. We should move away from that and get more towards a federalist system.
I think it's kind of necessary, though, right? It's what's kind of kept us going because most of our states can barely run their own budgets and have to get money from the other states.
Okay, so a couple things. First, the easiest example to look at that is something as simple as drug laws. Do you think, your opinion real quick first, do you think marijuana should be legal or illegal?
Legal.
Do you think the state should have the right to decide that or the federal government?
Federal government, yeah.
Okay.
Equal protection.
Okay.
I don't think someone in one state should be able to smoke a joint while the person in the next state is getting a 3 strikes 40-year sentence over a joint.
Okay, so that would imply that the state should not have the right to say anything's illegal, but it should only be the purview of the federal government. So, for example, pornography. If one state says, hey, we don't want pornography in this state, you would say, nope, no, it shouldn't be up to them. It should only be up to the federal government.
Just because there's one thing, right? There are federal laws, there are state laws, there are local laws.
Right, but you just said when it comes to a law that one of the quintessential we see of federalist laws, right, when it comes to legalization of marijuana, that the state should not be allowed to decide. So just to be clear, right now it's considered illegal by the federal government. So you think that Colorado is wrong when they've legalized it? You think that should be beyond their power? It's a pretty simple question.
No.
Okay, so then you're conceding, at least in this one issue, that you favor the state having the right to decide this.
I think there are certain things that the states I mean, are going to like push the federal government to move on for sure. And there's definitely gray area. So I guess, yeah, that is a little bit of a gray area in my own thinking right there.
Okay, but the point is, you said previously that you thought that what it seems like to me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you want the federal government to say it's legal, and therefore each state should not have the right to say that it's illegal. But when the inverse is suggested, because your personal opinion is it should be legal, when the inverse is suggested, you're like, no, I'm cool with the state having their voice heard. It seems to me you're picking and choosing based on what you want the outcome to be. If the states favor what you want done, then you say, sure, give the states a voice. But if the federal government favors, then you say, yes, the federal should have supremacy.
To me, it comes down to the states abusing the citizens, though.
What does that mean?
Or the federal government abusing the citizens. Like, I think each one, and that's why we have the power dynamic, right? So that one doesn't completely supersede the other in all cases. That's why I agree with you earlier on the 10th Amendment. So, like,
right. So I would think that
the big deal is that each of the states, if left to their own devices, will find ways to there's already a buttress to the federal government's power, and that's that the states have the disparate power.
Okay,
but if we don't allow the federal government to have power, then the states could do the exact same thing, right?
Okay, let's do this real quick. Do you believe that you're not a total like ANCAP or libertarian, right? You think, let's just take
Not
substances.
libertarian at all.
Okay, so let's just take substances when that's on. Do you think that there are any drugs that should be illegal?
Sure.
Okay, so can we just say hypothetically like meth or heroin? I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So we both of us agree that there's some level of drug that we would say, even if we think there's marijuana doesn't meet that level, there's some level of drug. Okay, do you think though that it should be allowed for a country around the world to say that some substance is legal and some substance isn't? For example, let's just take if the UK hypothetically says, you know what, we think alcohol should be illegal. Do you think that should be okay, or is that a violation of people's rights for them to say that?
I think it's harder to make arguments against libations that don't do like direct harm.
Right, but you've already conceded the threshold that there are sort of substances that the state has the right to say are illegal. So any claims of like, look, the state doesn't have the right to say you not imbibe this substance, that goes out the window. You already conceded that, right? Now it's just a threshold argument. Well, what level? And so if another state, if the UK wants to say, hey, we think alcohol should be illegal, why shouldn't they be allowed to say that? I don't think the United States should say that's a human rights violation. You can't say that. Of course they should be allowed. You disagree?
I don't know. Anybody's saying that there's a human rights violation.
Well, it would be a rights violation,
and the rights comes when like putting people in jail for doing it, right?
Right. Well,
like,
that would imply if it's illegal. So they put people in jail for drinking alcohol. By the way, that used to happen in our country.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that that's a violation if they lock someone up for alcohol?
Sure. It was a larger
but not if they locked them
than the immorality they were trying to fix.
But not if they locked them up for heroin.
No, I don't think so, no.
What's the difference?
Heroin does direct harm, is immediately addictive. There's
so cigarettes. Should cigarettes be illegal? You see, you can't give a real good reason. It's just a threshold argument. But that means that you're not.
Yeah, it's obviously a threshold argument.
Right.
Yeah.
But then so who then gets to decide these thresholds? Right? That's what I'm getting at.
It's all just moral norms. There's no hard like moral argument for it.
That's true.
You get to
That's
the direct
exactly
harm. That's why the harder drugs make an easier argument. Because
exactly
it's
the point I'm
direct
making.
Moral argument.
It's not this like cut and dry black and white thing. It's a threshold argument. So then my question becomes, who should get to decide that threshold? If another country decides the threshold's in a different place than the United States, shouldn't they have the right to do that?
When did I say that the other countries couldn't do things outside of the United
States? I did. You implied. You said that if the UK locks people up for alcohol, that would be violating those people's rights. The point I'm trying to get to is, I think that if you were honest, you would probably say this. You'd say, you know what? The people of each country should vote to make their feelings heard on when that threshold should be. Wouldn't you agree?
Sure.
And that would imply that the local people would have more of an idea of what their culture wanted than people around the world, right? My argument would be that's the exact same rationale as to why states should decide these things as opposed to the federal government. Let each state decide because they understand their own people and their own culture more, just like the people of the UK understand their own people and their own culture more than other countries around the world. Same rationale is why we should provide more local people making these decisions than federal people.
In some cases, that might be the exact case, but in many cases, you could also have a state where they just have a majority population that wants to impose something on a minority, and the minority doesn't want that. Like,
But we understand that there are certain things, right? Like the majority couldn't say we're going to murder the minority. That would be federally illegal. But we've already conceded that neither of us are extreme on either side. We're both having some sort of threshold. We're talking about the bulk of things that aren't those outlined specifically in the federal constitution. Who should have the rights to say that? You said the federal government should have more of those rights. I say no, the state should. And what I'm saying is the states, local people will always understand local culture better. Just like, for example, in the state I live in, Pennsylvania, we have what's called dry townships. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
No alcohol.
Shouldn't they have the right to say that? Or should you say the federal government should say, nope, every township must allow the right to sell alcohol? I think that'd be terrible. I think if your town wants to vote and the people there want to vote to decide, you know what, we're not going to have any businesses that sell alcohol here, why shouldn't they have that right?
Rob, would you make that same argument on like a county that has different laws on magazine capacity size? Because those exist currently.
Well, that becomes murkier because the Constitution expressly discusses firearms. So like that's sort of the irony of this thing. It's funny to me because sort of the big government lefties on the very issues that you would be like, we agree, it's made clear that the federal government says this supersedes immigration, firearm laws. You have a right. Right? There's more shit said about your right to own a firearm in the Constitution than almost all the other things that lefties want to talk about that you have a right to. And yet they want to say at a state by state level that could be infringed more. For example, if the Constitution blatantly says you have a right to life, people can't murder you, the states shouldn't have the right to say, nah, never mind. We think we're allowed to murder.
Well, it does say you have the right to life. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right, but there's sort of an implication of, well, what does that mean? I think
You're out of your element, Donnie.